Coming up on this episode, the full schedule for the NBA's new in-season tournament, the NBA Cup, was released in the last 24 hours. We'll go through the Warriors group and their schedule of games, plus why Golden State will be hoping there isn't a repeat of the James Wiseman, LaMelo Ball draft stuff-up. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. We're currently recording this. It's about nearly 3 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon here in Australia, which is probably around midnight for many in America. It's fair to say that this is quite a big day in the history of Australia. And a lot of if you're American listening to this, you'd think, what's the deal? But we are in the semi-finals of the FIFA Women's World Cup, and no word of a lie, I don't think I'm overstating things by saying this is probably the biggest sporting event in the history of Australia. And we've had quite a fantastic and rich sporting history, but the vibe in the country at the moment is just on a completely different level to what I've ever witnessed. And yeah, we're about 5 hours from kickoff, and I am nervous. This episode will not get released until after the game, so hopefully you're listening back to this, and hopefully we being Australia, have got the win over the arch enemy England, who we've got such a big sporting rivalry against in a multitude of sports. So I'm very nervous, and it's going to be a big 5 hour wait ahead. It's going to feel like it's going to go for a year. But looking forward to getting down and watching the Matildas tonight go at it. It's going to be, as I said, potentially the biggest sporting event in Australian history. It's quite crazy. Anyway, let's get on to the NBA and the Golden State Warriors. So the schedule for the in-season tournament, the NBA Cup, was revealed on NBA Today earlier. The Warriors, of course, in Group C, Western Conference Group C, along with the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Sacramento Kings, the San Antonio Spurs, and the Oklahoma City Thunder. So when this group, I guess, was revealed a couple of months ago now, I initially thought, hey, this is a pretty good group for the Warriors. Obviously, the Kings finished third in the West last season, but they weren't your typical third seed kind of thing. They obviously surprised everyone to rise to that point, but the Warriors did beat them in a hard-fought 7-game series in the first round. Other than that, the Timberwolves, disappointing last season. I think there's a little bit of optimism surrounding the Timberwolves, but obviously the whole Rudy Gobert trade and everything has caused a little bit of strife within the franchise. Karl Anthony Towns, hopefully for the Timberwolves' sake, they can get a full season out of him next year. Later this year, next season. Anthony Edwards is an absolute star. Looking forward to seeing him go at it for Team USA in the upcoming FIBA World Cup. But this group is not one with a tremendous amount of depth. The Oklahoma City Thunder are clearly a team that are going to be on the rise next season. They will obviously want to push for a playoff berth. Who comes out for them, I guess, is the big question mark. They're immensely talented. And, of course, the Spurs are going to be one of the most fascinating teams in the league, given they've got the number 1 overall pick in Victor Wembanyama, the French phenom that everyone's going to want to watch play. Will that translate to any wins for San Antonio? Perhaps more than they got last season. I actually like their young core with Jeremy Sohan and Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson and the likes. And obviously, adding Wemby to that mix, they are going to be exciting to watch. Whether they're anything close to relevant in terms of wins and potentially making the play-in tournament, I doubt that's necessarily going to be the case. Anyway, looking at the Warriors games here, so they start off on November 3 at the Thunder at Paycom Center. To start off, they've got the Timberwolves on November 14 back at Chase Center, followed by the Spurs at Chase Center on November 24, and finish off at the Kings at Golden One Center on November 28. So, as I said, I think the Warriors should be favourites. This is a fairly easy, not easy group. I think that's probably unfair, but it's probably a lighter group than some others. There is some talent. There's no doubt about that. But as I said before, the Spurs are clearly still in rebuilding mode, and the Thunder, while they're going to be pushing for a playoff berth, we'll just wait and see if there's a team that actually comes out for them. And the Timberwolves and Kings are solid playoff teams, but The Warriors should go into this group thinking that if we want to take this seriously, we can advance through to the quarterfinals, which will be played on December 4 and 5, and then the winners of that will advance to the semi-finals, which will be played in Las Vegas on December 7, followed by the championship game on December 9 in Vegas. Are the Warriors going to be motivated to actually win the NBA Cup? I think that's the biggest question on the lips of fans, not only of the Warriors, but teams around the league, is especially for experienced teams and experienced players who are really all about trying to win an NBA championship. How motivated is their team going to be? Are players going to be to win a tournament that is really, at the moment, motivated by money, and that's it? Because there's no prestige, there's no legacy about winning the NBA Cup at this stage or being the MVP of the tournament or anything. Maybe down the line that actually does come into thinking and is an element for players. But right now in its infancy, I don't think that's necessarily the case. So you get $500,000 to be a part of the winning team, and you get prize money for the quarterfinals up. For the Warriors with a veteran core, with Chris Paul 38, Steph Curry 35, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green both 33, what is $500,000 actually doing for them? What is it doing for them? Bugger all, really. I mean, it's nice, but those guys have made hundreds of millions of dollars in their career. They don't need an extra $500,000. So it's going to be interesting to see how motivated those guys are to want to win this tournament. And I guess it's going to have to come down to a team aspect in terms of, hey, can these older guys be motivated for some of the other guys, for some of the other younger guys like Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Trace Jackson Davis, Brandon Pajemski, Lester Quinones, these types who have made, in the case of Jackson Davis, he's going to be on a 4-year contract here on $6-7 million over the next 4 years. $500,000 to him is actually going to be a fair bit. So it's going to be intriguing to me to see how that plays out with a dynamic between the veteran core and the younger players and how motivated each player will be. But I do think the Warriors can advance from this group if they are motivated to do so. And hopefully, I think, the competitive nature of Curry and Green and Paul and Thompson, I don't think they need any extra motivation. However, I do think that, hey, if we're coming to, November 14 against the Minnesota Timberwolves and Chris Paul has got any inkling of a slight injury, if he's not 100%, if he's 99%, then they're not going to force him out on the floor just because it's an NBA Cup game. They're not going to be doing that. So that's, I think, what you've got to watch out for, is that they're not going to be pushing players out on the floor just for the sake of it. They are primarily just going to be taking this as regular season games, and I think most of the time players should be motivated for any game that they play in, and perhaps there's an extra little bit of motivation here with the NBA Cup, but again, they're not going to be risking the health of players for the sake of it when Golden State's main motive is to get to the playoffs fully healthy, hopefully with a high enough seed, and then try and win an NBA championship from there. Moving on, and I just wanted to speak about a topic that's at the front of my mind at the moment, and I'll tell you why, but we'll go back a little bit here. So if you look at the Warriors' recent drafting history, it hasn't been great, and I guess it's been emphasised by the James Wiseman selection, right, at pick number 2 in the draft. Now, I don't think at the time that was a mistake at all, but obviously in the benefit of hindsight, LaMelo Ball was already an all-star level player. He was taken pick 3 by the Hornets, and Wiseman in his third season was traded by the Warriors after less than 70 games in his career. Now, obviously injury plagued. Obviously, the fit in the Warriors system was never there, despite the fact that they really drafted Wiseman, I think, at the time, primarily because they didn't have a true all-star level center. Let's put it that way. Like, I'm trying not to be disparaging of Kevon Looney. He's a fantastic role player, and even back then, he was a good role player. But they never had that kind of talent, that kind of athleticism and size at the center position. Although the Warriors will say they were picking best available over position, there's certainly an element of position involved in that, and the potential of having LaMelo Ball behind Steph Curry and kind of having to wait in the wings for him was certainly at play, and a reason why Wiseman was the general consensus selection there which has obviously turned out to be an absolute disaster. But if we go to the next year and 2021, I think this is a pivotal year for that particular draft where the Warriors took Jonathan Kuminga at pick 7 and Moses Moody at pick 14. And obviously, over recent weeks, Jonathan Kuminga's been a player that I've spoken about a lot. Spoke about his performance at the crossover on the weekend if you want to go back and check last episode. But this is really about him coming into his third year now, and the Warriors really hoping and praying that they don't have another Wiseman-Ball situation on their hands. So the reason this is at the front of my mind is because at the moment the Australian Boomers are playing 3 games in Melbourne as a warm-up to the FIBA World Cup, which is getting underway in about 10 days here. So I was watching, they played their first game the other night against Venezuela, who pretty poor opposition, no doubt. But I was watching Josh Giddey in action, and my goodness, it was disgusting. It was disgustingly good. Like, within 3 minutes, he basically should have been off the floor because it was flat out unfair that he was out there. It was the way he was picking apart the Venezuelan defense, which, like, let me reiterate, was nowhere near NBA quality, that's for sure. But the way he was picking apart the defense at his size with his playmaking ability was just ridiculous. It was totally unfair. He should not have been out there. And it just got me thinking again how, and this is a little bit different to the Wiseman-Ball situation. It's not a complete parallel. The Warriors had access to LaMelo Ball in the 2020 NBA draft. They didn't have access to Giddey because the Thunder got in and stole him at pick 6, which at the time was an incredible surprise. Like, I remember going into that draft, Giddey was seen as somewhere between 10 and 12, maybe around that mark. I think there was, even a week before the draft, there was the potential of him being available with the Warriors' second lottery pick, which was pick 14, which was obviously used on Moses Moody. But the closer we got, the higher he kind of rose. But even on draft night, there was still a thought that, okay, this guy will go between 10 and 12. And there was a thought that if he was to go pick 7 to the Warriors, that would be quite a reach. And so he was obviously taken by the Thunder at pick 6, and that was seen as probably one of the biggest surprises in the lottery that night. However, I actually interviewed Josh's dad, Warwick Giddey, who is an NBL legend over here in Australia. I interviewed him about 2 weeks after the draft, maybe. In fact, it might have been a little bit longer. It might have been post-Summer League where he injured his ankle. But anyway, regardless of what it was before the following NBA season. And he actually said to me that the Warriors had promised Josh that if he were available at pick 7, that they would take him. So that gives you an idea of the mindset of the Warriors heading into that draft, is that even though they had, Steph Curry and they had Jordan Poole, who we've got to remember at that time, Jordan Poole was coming off a season where he'd actually had a G League stint. It looked like a complete disaster. And then he returned from that G League stint and he was a completely different player. It was bizarre. He was a completely different player. And he was quite a productive player and part of the Warrior rotation, obviously, in the latter half of that season where they got things rolling a little bit and ended up losing in the play-in. But at that point, Jordan Poole was not quite Jordan Poole. Like, he was at a point where Warrior fans were really starting to take notice. It's like, hey, this guy could really be something. But he wasn't necessarily grabbing league-wide attention. And then obviously he did in the 2021-22 season, was one of the most improved players in the league. And within that kind of 12-month span, ended up becoming a 4-year, $120+ million player, which is quite a rise. But if we're going back to the 2021 NBA draft, that Jordan Poole was not the kind of rising star that we saw 12 months later. Anyway, so the Warriors were going to pick Josh Giddey if he was available, and he should have been available. He should have been available. As I said, the selection of him at 6 was quite a surprise. So, again, the Warriors didn't have access to him, but I'm watching Josh Giddey and I'm thinking, oof. I love Jonathan Kuminga. I'm really excited for him, but imagine having Josh Giddey on the Warriors right now in place of Chris Paul. Because right now, Josh Giddey, to me, is a better player than Chris Paul. And he's also on a tenth of the money, more than a tenth of the money, about a twelfth of the money. I think he's making about $6 to $7 million next season. Imagine having him feeding Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. And I actually think with Giddey's size, 6'8", he's not the greatest defender right now, that's for sure. It's probably one of the weaknesses of his game, but he has got the size there to be able to compete, and he should get better. And with his rebounding ability, I mean, the guy has averaged 7.9 rebounds and 7.8 rebounds in each of his first 2 seasons. So with his rebounding ability, with the size, you could play he, Steph, and Klay together, and I think get away with it perfectly fine. In a way that you're not going to be able to get away with playing CP, Steph, and Klay for a huge amount of minutes next season. Now, obviously, we're going to see it a fair bit. We might see it 10 to 15 minutes a game, but I don't think you could play the 3 together for 25 minutes a game like you potentially could if Giddey was on the roster. And so I think this is a pivotal season for Jonathan Kuminga, just to kind of reassure Warrior fans that, hey, we didn't make a mistake here. And again, they didn't make a mistake because Giddey was not available. But if you look at who was taken at pick 8 and Franz Wagner, as I said, I love JK. I'm looking forward to what he can produce next season. But I think any non-bias fan would know that, hey, we'd much rather Franz Wagner on the team right now over Jonathan Kuminga. And I know it's hard to evaluate sometimes because the opportunity that JK has gotten with the Warriors is much less than what Josh Giddey has got with OKC or Franz has got with the Magic. But still, you can see Giddey and Wagner play, and you can see that the IQ, the playmaking, the way they move, it's a Warrior fit. It would be a seamless Warrior fit. Unlike JK, who has got all the athleticism in the world and is a very exciting prospect. And I actually thought I was really impressed at times last regular season with the way he was able to actually fit into the Warrior system. Like, I was really impressed with some of the things he picked up last season. However, that's still stuff that's the Warriors have really had to drill into him and really teach to him. And I'm sure they've shown him countless and countless hours of footage to try and bring him into a more Warrior style of player. As with Josh Giddey and with Franz Wagner, you wouldn't have had to do that. They've just got this innate sense, this innate playmaking ability that they have out on the floor that is special. It really is. And especially in the case of Giddey. So the Venezuelan defense the other night, I felt sorry for them. I've genuinely felt sorry for them because he's getting to a point where he's just way, way too good for that kind of level. And he was the clear standout. My fiance turned to me and said, who's the best player out there? And I said, Josh Giddey's 1,000 times better than anyone else out there. And the Boomers, we have some good other players. We have Patty Mills and we have Matisse Thybulle and we have Joe Ingles and Jock Landale and Josh Green were both out injured for that game. Like, we've got some really good NBA talent. But Josh Giddey was just on a completely different level in that game. He was. And it just made me think about the potential of having him at the Warriors. Again, I'm super excited about the potential of JK and what he could provide the Warriors next season. And I think there's still a world here in which Jonathan Kuminga actually develops into a better player than Josh Giddey. But obviously the Warriors are in win-now contention, and if JK doesn't necessarily show something next season, then there is the potential of him being moved by the trade deadline. That's just what it is. And so that's, again, why it's a pivotal third season for JK, to kind of reassure Warrior fans that they didn't make a huge... they weren't hugely unfortunate here in having him flanked by Giddey at 6 and Wagner at 8. In a way, like Wiseman was flanked by Edwards at 1 and Ball at 3, both who are all-star level players now, within a few years. So it's not a complete disaster for the Warriors right now, but I think for me, and I'm sure for other Warrior fans, it's making me a little anxious that we could be going down a similar path here where you could have, or you were close to having, an all-star level player, and instead you got someone who's uber athletic, uber talented, but didn't quite fit the system and was potentially departing the franchise before the completion of his third season. So we'll wait and see how it pans out. It's going to be super interesting. Anyway, other than that, that'll do us for this episode of the Golden State with Mates podcast. We'll be back later in the week, teeing up a time with Lee to do the Western Conference power rankings. So looking forward to that. Other than that, guys, check me out on Twitter at POC252. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us and leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get this podcast.